Okay, it's 2 minutes after 1, and let's go ahead and get started. Welcome, everybody, to the Michigan Historic Preservation Network May webinar, Albert Kahn Through the Years. My name is Xiaohan Smith. I will be your moderator today. And before I turn it over to our speaker, I would like to go over some Zoom items. First of all, if you have any questions, please type them into the Q&A box as you think of them. All the questions will be answered at the end of the presentation. If you have any technical difficulties, please also put them into the Q&A box. And the chat box will be used to share links or resources discussed during the webinar. Both the Q&A and chat box are located at the bottom of your Zoom screen. If you don't see them, please wiggle your mouse. And please participate in the survey after the webinar concludes. If this is your first time attending our webinar, we are the Michigan Historic Preservation Network. We support the sustainability and economic viability of Michigan's historic places through advocacy, education, and direct action. We could not do the work we do without our members and volunteers. If you are not a member yet, please consider joining us at www.mhpn.org. And our webinars are supported in part by an award from the Michigan Arts and Culture Council and National Endowment for the Arts. We want to say a big thank you to our sponsors. And it is my great pleasure today to introduce you our speaker, Heidi Fens. Heidi is the president of Albert Kahn Legacy Foundation, the vice president director of the business development of Albert Kahn Associates. Heidi's bio can be found on our website, and I will also send a link to the chat box in a minute. And with that, I will go ahead and turn it over to our speaker.
Hello. Can you hear me? Okay, everything is, whoops, wait a minute. Everything good? Okay. So as she said, I'm Heidi from the Albert Kahn Legacy Foundation. And today I'm going to talk a little bit about Albert Kahn through the ages. And some of you, many of you probably have heard about who Albert Kahn is, but we're going to do a little bit of an overview about the man behind the movement and a few stories that have been generated from the Kahn archives, and then Albert Kahn Associates looking forward and what the foundation is doing to make sure those stories of that legacy stays alive for future generations. And then we'll have questions and answers. So welcome. So the man behind the movement, this is Albert Kahn. He was born in 1869 in Ruhan, Germany. He arrived in America in 1881 at 12 years old. This is his family. He was the oldest son of an immigrant family that came to Detroit. His father was a Jewish rabbi and was itinerant rabbi. And so he was on the road a lot. And so Albert on the far right was the oldest, and he helped support his mom and all of the rest of his siblings. Albert Kahn needed to find some work. He works in the stables. He did whatever any boy at 8th grade could possibly do. Eventually ended up being an office boy at Mason and Rice, which was an architectural firm in the Detroit area. And he, Mason and Rice did a lot of influential people's homes. And so Albert, started sharpening pencils and, sweeping floors and stuff like that, and worked his way up to a drafter, learned the trade from George Mason and the office. In 1890, he won a traveling scholarship to Europe. And it was a magazine that had this competition, and he had won that competition and traveled Europe for a year. and then he came back and worked at Mason Rice's firm. By the age of 22, he was the head designer at Mason Rice. He decided in 1895 to branch out and start his own firm. So he started Nelson and Kahn and Trowbridge, and it was a difficult time. It was hard to get a practice going when there was a recession going on. And then one of the gentlemen died, the other one decided to go out to the East Coast to be an architecture professor. And so Albert was left by himself and in 1897 temporarily went back with George Mason. But while he was back with George Mason, he was continuing some of the projects that he had started. Some of the projects are in 1896, the Hiram Walker's Children's Hospital. And so that was here in Detroit, and also the Palms Apartments, which, was George Mason and Albert Kahn working together on that project. Albert starting out was really at the right place in the right time. He was in Detroit where the Industrial Revolution was just beginning. And so because of the timing of what was happening in Detroit and the markets that he's in, he made a huge difference. And so I'm going to share some of the stories in the archives with you. And this is an example of how Albert Kahn's relationships with these different people extended from their residence to their business, to their places of worship, to the communities that they interacted with, and their entertainment. All of those things kind of came together. And so you'll see in Albert Kahn's portfolio a variety of huge swing from the Detroit Golf Club to church. This is a Temple Bethel church, to the aquarium out at Bella, and just so many different building types, where most architects at that time only had like one specialty. I'm going to highlight a few of the examples. This is an example of George Booth, and George Booth was the New Booth newspaper family. And so for Mr. Booth, or George Booth, he did the Cranbrook House in 1906. He did the Booth newspaper, and he was very involved together with George Booth in supporting the Detroit Institute of Arts, the Detroit Society of Arts and Crafts. And this relationship went on throughout his entire life and career, and actually designed George Booth's tombstone. He did several tombstones, and it was those lifetime clients. I think it was very fascinating that Albert was so involved in starting that arts and crafts movement in Detroit. And so many of the things that you see and people associate with Albert Kahn happen to be in that arts and crafts style. But that's not the only thing he did. It's just a piece of what he did. Another relationship that was really, really important to Albert Kahn's career was Joseph Boyer. He was Albert's very first industrial client. He did the Boyer Detroit residence in 1901, and then in 1902, the Consolidated Pneumatic Tool Company. That was really his getting into that industrial space. But he went on to work with Joseph Boyer and Burroughs Adding Machine Company, which ends up being a significant neighborhood in Detroit, where there's different buildings, and the Henry Ford Health Systems Administration Office is actually in what was one of those Burroughs Adding Machine Burroughs buildings. He also did other Boyer buildings for him, and the Joseph Boyer Mausoleum. So those were lifetime friends. And you might want to watch, because Chris Meister has a book that is coming out this year that talks a lot about those early relationships. And I think they're fascinating. And so you might want to look up that if you're interested in that kind of thing. One of the other things that was happening at the time is there was a lot of issues with fires, as the industrial buildings, they were building them out of wood or, a concrete or brick outside, wood inside. But all of these industrial revolved around oils and grease and stuff like that. And they would explode into flames a lot. There's a recent book that is called Concrete Century, Julius Kahn and the Construction Revolution. Very, very fascinating book, which talks about how we switched from those wooden construction that were so flammable to the design of a reinforced concrete building, which Albert's brother Julius, who's a structural engineer, actually invented this truss conbar, which made so many of the industrial buildings fireproof, used it in other types of buildings as well. And so this was kind of like the beginning of the concrete reinforced construction that we still see today. But then because of that, and knowing that these industrial facilities were so important to this industrial revolution in building them smarter and better than ever before, Henry Ford and many of the other industrial giants who were starting to do automotive were looking to Albert Kahn because it's a big investment in their manufacturing, and they wanted safe buildings. So Henry Ford, Bill Knudsen, and Henry Joy, and all of the big companies, actually, there was a lot more than the big three, which we think of today, in the Detroit area. There was a lot of them experimenting, and Albert designed many, many, many of these buildings. And he didn't just do big squares. He was looking for efficient operations, the worker environment. He added the big windows, the daylight and the ventilation, and speed of construction, which all were really, really critical to those environments. So the first assembly line buildings for Ford, he then went out to the Rouge site. He did certainly a whole bunch for Packard. Just that relationship, and then everybody was moving, not just in the Detroit area, but expanding across the country and across the globe. And Albert was a part of that. Fascinatingly, moving forward, also in the 20s, it's been the Industrial Revolution. There's all this wealth and all that stuff, and then the stock market crashed. Well, Albert Kahn's office was asked to go over to Moscow and help them because they had no industrialization at all. And here Albert Kahn's plugging away across the country. And so a team of 25 people went to Russia to show them, kind of build this tractor factory and multiple tractor factories, and then teach the people in Russia how to build industrial facilities. And so between 1929 and 1932, they taught a whole bunch of Russian people how to build industrial facilities. And so there's a really interesting book, An Architecture for Industrialization, that you might want to look for. It's a very fascinating book, and it's written by multiple authors telling the story of what Albert Kahn and how Russia became industrialized. And then we came back to, things kind of were getting a little weird in the Soviet Union. And so they came back to the US. And at that time, it was looking at, okay, how we just did 500 and some factories. And so we got the system down to how to create something really fast. And as we came back to the US, it's time for building up that arsenal of democracy across the country. And so Albert Kahn certainly played a good role in that. There's a wonderful book called Freedom's Forge by Arthur Herman. And it talks a lot about Bill Knudsen and calling together the industrial giants and the new center building, presenting the need. Well, if anybody knows much about the New Center area, the New Center building was where Albert Kahn's office was. And we see our client base, Chrysler, Continental, Packard, Ford, General Motors, Hudson, Nash Kelvin, and a whole bunch of others were building. They all agreed to come together and as an industry build up our arsenal of democracy when the government was not quite on board yet. They had companies stepping up and saying, okay, we need to have a part in this. And that's a huge presence from military bases to airplane factories all across the country at a really rapid pace. So it's a fascinating book to read. And then the other thing that Albert Kahn did is he created this, other architects were looking at him and saying, oh, what is he doing? They were looking at the factory design and looking at how to create other kinds of buildings with the factory design. Of course, Albert kind of liked his arts and crafts style, but that didn't mean others weren't looking at his buildings, and it was inspiring the modern movement. So there's quite a few interesting stories about the various architects that either came from Kahn, worked with Kahn, or were inspired by Kahn. There's a really interesting book, Making the Modern by Terry Smith. It talks a lot about how Albert Kahn's influence of the modern movement. And that's where a lot of people outside of the Detroit area see the modern movement and it's like, oh yeah, that's inspired by Albert Kahn. And we in Detroit often look at our 1920s, our arts and crafts style. It's like, oh, that's Albert Kahn. And we'll see factories. It's like, oh, that's Albert Kahn. So he's inspired a whole bunch of different people. But Albert's really true passion was embedding the arts, the companies that he worked with that brought the arts into the buildings, and you'll see it on many of the wonderful buildings between the sculptures working with Corrado Parducci, I always say it wrong, the bronze work, the frescoes, all of that was an important part of what Albert loved, the beauty of embedding architecture and art together. But it didn't stop with just Albert in his office. This was a family affair. So when I mentioned earlier that Julius was part of the invention of the reinforced concrete and started his own company. Lewis, his brother Lewis, also was in the company, and he kind of was the business guy, operations, project management, and stuff like that. Moritz was a guy that he was traveling around kind of doing the business development stuff, and he actually took the team to the Soviet Union. Albert's wife, Ernestine, and Julius's wife, Margaret, also were involved in the communities because they helped start Con Realty, and they were owners in Con Realty, equal partners with their husbands, which was unheard of in that day, and developed little neighborhoods, mixed use, where as people immigrated to the Detroit area, helped find a place where they could live above and start a business below and get settled and build a presence in the Detroit area. Huge, fascinating story. You'll want to read Michael Hodges's book, Albert Kahn in Detroit. Talks a lot about the family and the different pieces of that. And then another one that's, I think, a fascinating book to read is William Bashir's Albert Kahn and His Family in Peace and War. And this book um, highlights a lot of the culture stuff. There's a lot of letters that go between Albert and his family members. Um, and so you kind of see the character of Albert. So it's not just beautiful architecture. There was significant character in him as a person. And so we think, I think, and others said these stories in the buildings must be preserved. You know, Albert's impact is significant. There were 25,000 projects done in Albert Kahn's lifetime on 6 of the 7 continents, and all these variety of types that have inspired generations and have made impacts on not only the Detroit community, but all the communities where these projects happen. So the company was formed before Albert died. He passed his company on to his stockholders. So today you hear all this stuff about employee-owned companies and stuff. Well, Albert made that happen before he died in the 40s. And this year, we are celebrating 130 years of Albert Kahn's practice from when he started it until today. And this picture is Kim Montague, our current president of Albert Kahn Associates, who is the first female and 12th president of the company. And so, you know, we're looking towards the next 130 years as a company, but then the foundation was established to tell the story of the past. And so it's a separate organization. It's totally a community-based foundation, a separate board. There's only one employee that is employed by the company and the foundation, and that's me. And I was a starter of the foundation. And so I want to tell you a little bit about some of the cool things that, you know, I had no idea would happen. So actually, I'm going to just tell you a little bit first before I go into that. So one of the reasons why we wanted to start the foundation is the company owns about 10,000 rolls of drawings of these Albert Kahn historical buildings. And they're in a vault, kind of. It's a storage room that is not very protected. There are rolled drawings of big projects and little projects, and the big ones might be rolled and squished on top of the smaller ones. And I know there's a wealth of wonderful research and resources for people in there. And so we're like, how do we make this available for those authors who are doing research and for students and for people who are restoring Albert Kahn buildings and really want to see what it was originally. And so that was my motivation for wanting to start it. And we wanted to have some of the Albert Kahn family members also involved. And so my first ask was to some of the grandchildren, great-grandchildren of Albert, would you be interested in participating with this community foundation? So we set it up as a community-based. Then there was a very large contingent of Jewish people that absolutely loved Albert Kahn and wanted to do exhibits and museum and, you know, to tell that story too. And we were like, okay, we should be coming together. And so not only was it the history from a archive standpoint, but it's the exhibit and to tell the public the story. And then it's to inspire the next generation and stuff like that. And so we have archivists, we have storytellers, we have architectural historians, and just a whole variety of people. And some of the things that we do throughout the year is tours and education. So this last year we've done bus tours. We partner with Detroit History Tours. We've organized walking tours and building tours. We also have an interactive map that shows where a bunch of Albert Kahn buildings are, especially in certain communities. So We have some walking tours that are on this interactive map in the Detroit area, in Walkerville over in Canada, in the Ann Arbor area, and we're just looking for how do we expand this to make this a bigger interactive map. We only have about 300 to 500 projects on the interactive map right now out of the 25,000 that exist. And so we have a lot of map updating to do. One of the other things that we have coming up, we are always looking for programs. We do webinars, but we also do the walking tours. And so this kind of shows you some of the walking tours, the bus tours, and then like we do webinars as well as in-person. And these are some of the events that are coming up, and they're usually on the website. I'm not gonna say always because our website's getting updated right now, so they're gonna be there soon if they're not up there right now. But always watch our website and you'll be inspired by how many things are happening. One of the other things that we're doing that's a pretty cool program, we hear a lot about, oh, I have an Albert Kahn building because it has those columns that look like martini glasses. Well, that was Julius Kahn's design, but Julius Kahn didn't only do that for Albert Kahn Company. It was how do we make our world safer? And so he formed his own company and taught how to do this reinforced concrete to multiple different companies. And so we have a plaque and interactive program. So we will verify, is this in fact an Albert Kahn design building? And then work with them to place a plaque on the building and give them a membership to the Albert Kahn Legacy Foundation so they can tell their story with the background research on that interactive map. And so they can share that map, they can share that story, they can have the world know that this is in fact an Albert Kahn building. And then this is an example of the Map Me interactive map and some of how we are marketing some of the projects. And so if you get a plaque, we'll make sure that the information gets on the website and in this interactive map. We also are doing pop-up exhibits. And so we're partnering with a bunch of different organizations around, so far it's just been around the state, where we have multiple banners that tells the Albert Kahn story. And so, this can be on the road and tell that story to other communities that might have Albert Kahn buildings, but people don't understand or appreciate it like they do in the Detroit metro area. This can go to Kalamazoo, to Grand Rapids, to, other states and tell that story. And that's what we're trying to do, is make sure that we do that. And we are looking for, one of the things that we're in the pursuit of right now is we would love to do a real museum, but we know how difficult that is to staff and maintain. But we are looking at a virtual museum so it can be shared across the globe. And then looking for permanent exhibit opportunities, maybe in some of the existing Albert Kahn buildings. And so when somebody comes and sees, then they can get plugged in and understand the history of why this building is significant and how it came to be. Like I mentioned, the archives, there's all kinds of really, really cool drawings. We have volunteers that come in about every other Friday and get geeked because they're helping us unroll them and catalog what is this building, whose initials are on it, which is really cool because there are architects who started at our firm, went on to build to go to other architecture firms or start their own firm, and you can see the initials, and so you can track who actually worked on those projects. And that's a story in itself. We're collecting artifacts. We have a couple samples here on the screen, and these are some of the medals that Albert Kahn had earned, and we are very grateful for Albert's grandson who passed away, but they gave these medals to the foundation for us to to share and display and tell the stories of that past. And so we are a resource to researchers, and we're trying to help preserve not only the drawings, but the buildings. Some of the ways that we do partner to help preserve the buildings, I have a big picture of the entrance to the Fisher Building. And if anybody had visited the Fisher Building in the last 20 years or so, the entrance really was hard to get into, and it had a lot of damage. And we have partnered with the Fisher Group to receive a state grant, a legislative grant, to receive money, then to pass through to the developer to help them with restoring these entrances. And so it's a partnership of us walking beside these companies, helping to help with the financial stack, but also walk beside them in publicity and storytelling and, all that goes along with that. We've also partnered with some other people. The Paquette Flats is a recent Albert Kahn Studebaker building that was made into apartments. There's the first Temple Bethel, which became the Bonstell Theater, that is being restored right now. We've partnered with them, did our annual meeting there, so we could share the story of the work in progress. And it's now, they're restoring the exterior of it in Albert Kahn's era, the interior of it in the Bonstell Theater era, so we can celebrate that building and how it transitioned. And also the second Temple Bethel, we had an annual meeting there as well, and did the tours of that building, and they're approaching their restoration efforts as well. Dearborn Inn, which is Ford's building that we designed many years ago, just recently was restored and opened. And we also are involved in storytelling. We shared documents with them from the original drawings, so they could see what things had been like. So often looking at those partnerships and how can we help tell the stories and advocate for others. And like I said, telling the stories, it's advocacy too. It's that preservation advocacy. How can we tell the story that is going to get the funding, that's going to keep the buildings? The one on the right is the Packard plant, and we know that a lot of it's gone, but there's still a couple buildings that we're hoping that soon those will be restored and be able to tell that story. Maybe not perfectly preserved or restored back to the way, but enough that we can tell that story to the next generation of that impact in Detroit. The center one is the Temple Bethel, in the first one, and that's now the Bonstell Theater that's under construction. And so the one on the left is the second Temple Bethel. So that's what I have to share. We also, are constantly brainstorming what's next. We did take a group of students through the train station, and it's like, well, this train station wasn't an Albert Kahn designed building, but the new lab, which was the building right next door, that was a book depository building, and it's a startup to for it's an incubation startup place. And we took students through there, and we're trying to, for the next generation, help them appreciate the architecture and how do I plug in and inspire kids to go into those kind of professions of architecture and engineering and stuff like that. So, I mean, we've got a lot of cool initiatives. We can always use more help and more people and more stories to be told. And so that as an organization is what we're trying to do, is share those stories. And whether you're local or whether you're in Texas or New York, we've even had opportunities to participate with the New York City Landmarks committee to talk about Albert Kahn building that was going to be destroyed in New York City. And we got to present to them and tell them the story of why that building is important and why it should be saved. So I hope that's interesting. That's about where I am. I'm going to stop sharing and hopefully we'll have some questions.
Thank you, Heidi, for the presentation. And we do have probably like a dozen questions in our Q&A box, and I'll start with the first one. And the first one is at the beginning of your presentation, there is a photo of Khan in the Mason and Rice office. Do
Uh-huh.
you know the name of the young woman in the photo?
I do not, but there could be some, I don't know off the top of my head. I think somebody did know, and I've heard somebody reference that, oh, you know who that is, but I don't know who that is. So I guess we can rely on other people to try to help us figure that out. If you want to know, you can certainly send me an email and I can see if any of our people know.
Okay,
There's no way I can know everything. So
okay, next question. As you mentioned, the interactive map, but is there a definitive list of Albert Kahn's projects and their locations around the world?
there is not. We have a list at the company. There is a list, but it is not complete. And it does not, it's organized by um, job number. So it started 1, 2, 3, and it lists the client's name. And then if we did like for the Packard plant, I think it's job number 201. It was 201A, 201B, because it was on that same site. It's gone through the alphabet 3 times of how many buildings and projects were on that site. And so I don't have a complete list, but we're hoping that the foundation volunteers in the archives will eventually create that. And we're not there yet.
That would be really awesome. Okay, next question. What can you say about the current generation of Kahn's relations? Are some of them architects and engineers?
Nope.
Mm.
There was only one person that is probably my generation that came to work for Albert Kahn, the company, for a little while. Um, but then she went into a different field. There are some great grandson, or at least one great grandson that I know of that went into engineering, but did not work for the company, but was very interested and kind of was in the southeastern part of the country. So there are some, but none of them involved in the company, except those board members who are like, I'm so excited. I had no idea, we've just kind of were like, oh, we don't want to live under grandpa's umbrella, but oh, this is so exciting. What's in grandpa's umbrella? And so they're discovering that and finding joy and connecting with family members. And that's what's so fun is, hearing the stories from the family too, or from what we call the ex-cons. Those were people who used to work for Con and they tell their stories too. And so capturing all of those stories are fascinating and great stories to be told.
That's awesome. Okay, next question. What what do you know about Albert Kahn's house on Walnut Lake in West Bloomfield?
Okay, that house, it's not Albert Kahn's house. It was a house designed possibly by Albert Kahn, and that's what we're trying to we have to find in our records. Is it in fact designed by Albert Kahn? His house that he lived in with his family was actually on Mack Avenue um, in Detroit, the one he built. And then they built a place out at, I want to say Walnut Lake or something like that, out a house that was out at a lake, and that was burned down intentionally by the fire department at one point. Um, so there's a whole lot of other houses that are around that they think are Albert Kahn, but and rumor is that Albert Kahn shared he still wanted to stay building houses for designing houses for friends and key people, but they may not have come through the company, they may have gone directly from him, and so we can or can't, there's several homes that we find that we can't find definitive stuff that says, yes, it is, or no, it isn't. So we're still trying to figure that out.
Okay, thank you. Next question. This attendee said she understands that the Bentley Library at U of M has many of Khan's papers. Can they also take the drawings and blueprints that currently are in the company vault?
So the Bentley does not, they have some of our most historically significant buildings that people were researching a lot. But they have limited space. And so, they're like, oh, we want these, but we don't want everything. And so we have an arrangement with them. And so they have some, we have some, and there's also the Lawrence Tech University also has some significant pieces that aren't drawings necessarily, but some of the resources. And so between the Bentley, the company, and LTU and family members, that's what one of the things the foundation is trying to do is make sure that, we have finding aids to help people navigate that. But they don't really have space for all of our stuff, but many of the photographs from a construction photographs, there was like 88,000 construction photographs that are at the Bentley now, and 16 or 12 four-drawer file cabinets of marketing photos that not all those have been scanned and digitized. And so that's, again, hopes of the foundation to be able to figure out how to get some of that stuff digitized over time.
Oh, wow. Okay, next question. Have you had any larger conferences that bring Albert Kahn's admirers together? This participant said she participated in a sold-out Cranbook sponsored program on UMM campus probably half a dozen years ago, and it focused on Kahn's work at UMM.
Well, we are noodling something. So we're thinking, I don't know if we're gonna make it happen, but we're thinking, I don't know how many of you have heard, the Frank Lloyd Wright Foundation is huge. They've been around for a while. They had something, a big conference in Detroit this last year, and people from all over the country came, and it's like, why are we not doing something like that? And so we're thinking we're going to try to do something in 2 years that tells the Albert Kahn story, and we'll see. So watch and pay attention to see if we can actually make that happen. We have worked with Lawrence Tech University, or I was on a committee. They did most of the work before I started the foundation, where they did a symposium and brought speakers in and stuff like that, but it was small. We want to make something in Detroit that's a little bigger and it's a little more significant, and maybe some tours plus speakers plus making that as a high level event. So if you want to help plan it, we could use some help. So we would love to do that.
Okay, thank you. Next question. You've spoken of long-term goal of getting protective easements placed on common buildings. What needs to come together to make that happen?
The right connections. I think, I don't, there's so many in so many communities, and we don't even know where are in danger. And some people don't even know they have an Albert Kahn building. And so part of it is, where are they? Across Michigan, I can tell you there is one at Kalamazoo College campus that has been talked about being demolished. We don't know. We have even we can't force them to keep a building because it's a college and they can do whatever they want. There's also in Muskegon, the Shaw Walker building that is being renovated, restored, repurposed, whatever. I'm not sure if it's really restored, but it's being repurposed. That's an Albert Kahn building. And I don't even think people in Muskegon necessarily know who Albert Kahn is to know that this is a special building and a special design. So part of it is telling the story, and part of it is recognizing and then advocating and getting people in those communities to value that instead of, yeah, sometimes it's easier to tear things down, but sometimes it's worth, investing the money to keep the building alive. There's wonderful Albert Kahn building in Saginaw. I would love to see, rebuilt and repurposed, but they're everywhere. They're everywhere.
Okay, next question. How do we join the Albert Kahn Legacy Foundation?
Well, that's easy. You can go to the um, albertkahnlegacy.org, www.albertkahnn, some people switch that around, albertkahnlegacy.org. And there is a spot on the website that you can sign up, you can donate, you can sign up. There's different levels. The entry level is $25. It has different levels that move up to different benefits depending on what level you are. And then there's also $2,500 lifetime membership. So, if you love it, you can keep doing that. And then, we're looking for also sponsorship organizations as we do some of our bigger events to help fund those. But we're only a 5-year organization and we've done so much amazing stuff in 5 years. So, we could use a few more extra brains behind all this.
Yeah, I just share the link in the chat box of the link to the website, so please check
Thank
it
you.
out. Okay, next question. Was there any kind of building or structure that Kahn did not design?
Let me think. What wouldn't he have designed? Huh? I can't think of anything. He's done so much. Um, I'll have to think about that. I can't think of anything, but I'm sure there's something.
Mhm. Okay, next question. So great presentation. And this is an unfair question, but do you have a favorite Kahn project?
I've asked that quite a bit, and actually, I do have a favorite. The Fisher Building is my favorite, and I'm so grateful that our office, the foundation, is right now embedded into the office of Albert Kahn Associates, and we were moved to the Fisher Building in 2018, which means I get to walk through that beautiful lobby every time I come to work, and it's like, oh, it's so beautiful. But there's so many other buildings that are so beautiful, but I'm fortunate that I get to enjoy the Fisher Building. Um, but there's so many others that are, how can you pick one?
Okay, next question. What are the sources of funding for the foundation's work? You're doing important work and it's worth the investment.
Yeah, a whole lot of people, not a whole lot of people, a whole lot of people working really hard for nothing is what we're funded. Membership is a piece of it. But like I said, most of our members are the $25 members. So it's not a huge dollar amount. The um, the founding board members got it started. Then we've had events that have had sponsorship that pays for those kind of events. And so certain organizations have come forward, we've applied for certain grants. The biggest one has been the partnership with like the Fisher Group, which is awesome. We're also looking for donations. Sometimes there's planned giving, from people who absolutely love Albert Kahn and love that work and leave something for him when they pass. So we've had a few of those, but we're a pretty slim organization, and so we're looking at how do we grow and how do we scale this organization, which is going to be a challenge. Fun challenge, but it's a challenge.
Okay, thank you. Next question. Are there any Kahn-designed residences where you can stay overnight?
Ooh. I'm not aware of any. There could be. I know that, I mean, you can go to the Dearborn Inn, which was not a residence, but it is a hotel. I'm not sure if there are or not. I know there's some buildings that have turned into housing, but I don't know that there's a overnight stay. I know there's hotels that have been made out of Albert Kahn buildings and apartments, but I don't know about maybe Airbnbs in some of those. I think, but they're not residences. So, but there might be some. I don't know. If you hear of any, let me know.
Okay, thank you. I think we have the last question. Did Albert Kahn ever take a break? This participant says she would really love to know what Albert Kahn, his wife, and children did when they took a vacation. Or is there any like books about his personal life? Any resources?
Yeah, there's the one book that I had shared about, and it was from Brashear, about him writing some stories, but he didn't take breaks very often. And we do know that because in some of the letters that he's written, like he was supposed to go with his family on a European vacation, but he didn't because he was working on a project because the military needed it, and so it was always this tug on can I, should I? And so I think he joined up with them for part of their trip, but not the whole trip. We have heard stories where he would fall asleep at his desk, at work. And I mean, he worked until his very last, until he had heart issues at the very end, but he was working until, you know, he couldn't work anymore. And so he just was driven and loved what he did and knew he was making a difference. And I think that is how he always just kind of lived through that. He loved music, he loved art. And so, his involvement with music, we know he loved listening to concert music and piano and all that stuff. We know he liked the art and the DIA and all the arts and crafts stuff, but I don't hear a whole lot about him relaxing.
Okay, I think that's all the questions we have. And thank you so much, Heidi, for the presentation. It's so great to learn more about Albert Kahn and the company and the Legacy Foundation. And we're so grateful for your time and knowledge sharing with us. And just a reminder to everybody that this webinar is being recorded. You will receive an email when the recording is available in the next few days. And please participate in the survey to help us improve our webinar program. And our June webinar is yet to be announced, so please follow our website for our future webinars and events. And I hope to see you all next time. Thank you again.
Thank you for having me. Bye-bye.
Bye.